Hi, everybody. Let's talk about Venus and specifically Venus in Virgo. There are so many things to say, but I'm going to try and summarize. Virgo is, as I've said numerous times, one of the most complex signs, the Virgo Pisces axis or polarity. So, first of all, look at what's going on here. We're just hours away from the solar eclipse, which I spoke about yesterday. And Venus enters Virgo just like before the solar eclipse. So to me, this says that she's part of what's going on here with this solar eclipse as well, particularly because as Venus moves through Virgo, she will come to form an opposition to Saturn. And that's a very important part of what's happening at the moment and the cycle of Venus itself. So let's just backtrack a little bit. First of all, when you're looking at Venus at the moment, and when you're listening to some of the themes I point to, think about it from the point of view of where Venus is transiting in your own chart at the moment, first of all. So, where is Virgo located in your birth chart? Um, the other thing before we start unpacking the present is to consider this date here, 7th of April. Venus and Saturn formed a conjunction in Pisces while Venus was retrograde, right? Because this was about 2 weeks before she became the morning star. So as she, proceeded forward, she ended up meeting up with the sun and became the Venus morning star, which is the current cycle we are in. So the first thing to think about is, okay, Venus is a morning star, which is Pallas Athena, which is the goddess of wisdom and strategy and war. And she is the goddess in the form of Pallas Athena, mostly associated to the earth. The morning star, relative to its cycle and the astronomy of it, it means that when Venus is retrograde, she is closest to the earth, and thus she corresponds to earthly matters. It is also said in ancient astrology that Venus, as a morning star, is actually a lot more stable in relationships. Her main concern is not about relationships whilst she's a morning star. She's very busy being associated with and connecting to earthly matters through wisdom, though, through wisdom and skill and strategy. And along the way, if she's in relationship with somebody, which she will be because Venus corresponds to all our relationships, she will be connecting with and processing those relationships in that particular way, in a Pallas Athena way, which is through wisdom. So coming back to this, Venus and Saturn forming a conjunction. So that's a new cycle right there of Venus and Saturn. And so this is the seeding, the birthing of this energy between Venus and Saturn. Now, the combination of Venus and Saturn is always quite difficult. It's not, Venus is about connecting. She's a goddess of sensuality and love and sex and all those things. Artistry, love, sharing, all those sorts of things. And Saturn has a real cold energy about it. And so when you bring Saturn and Venus together, it's a mismatching kind of energy. I mean, sure, there might be, for instance, Venus-Saturn could describe a relationship between two people where there's a great age difference. That's very, very common. Or Venus-Saturn can describe longevity because Saturn is Chronos, the ruler of time. A Venus-Saturn conjunction like this could reflect the beginning of a very karmic relationship, because Saturn also corresponds to karma, a difficult relationship or a relationship that starts slowly. You know, it's not a Mars-Venus energy. Mars-Venus energy would be the, jumping in, full on passion, full on lust, let's go for it, nothing holding them back. But with Saturn and Venus, it's more of a slow progression and process in the connection of the two people in a relationship. And as I said, there could be a significant age difference. It could be that, it just takes time for the relationship to build. It could be that the two people only see each other once a month, those sorts of things. We're talking about time. It's Saturn, right? Whatever it was and however it started and however that relates to you in that time frame. It could also be, let me just say this, that, you might already be in a relationship. So the Venus-Saturn energy for you, that seeding might have just started something very different in your current relationship, one that you've been in for a while, described by Saturn, and that might be needing to separate from your partner for a while, or, creating very specific boundaries that you need, or feeling more distant from each other. There's numerous examples and possibilities. Whatever it is, the matter to consider here is, well, something was seeded in April, okay? And then not long after this date here, Venus became the morning star. So when we come to the present moment with Venus in Virgo, she's in the opposite sign now, right? Pisces is the opposite sign to Virgo. So by what date is it? The 11th of October, a couple of weeks away, Venus will oppose Saturn. And that opposition to Saturn is the halfway point of the cycle that was seeded on the 7th of April. And what does an opposition typically present us with? It presents us with the ability to be more aware, to have a greater sense of understanding, clarity, awareness, illumination of our relationships. That can be good or bad, if you want to use simple language. That can be just recognizing and identifying more clearly the work that you have been doing, let's say, if you've been working on a particular relationship. Now, this could also correspond to matters that have nothing to do with relationships, because maybe you're not in a relationship, maybe you didn't start a relationship in April. This could have to do with just simply how you connect and relate with others, how you value all your relationships, how you value other people, how you value yourself, your own time. It could have to do with your resources and money and things like that as well, of course, things that you may have invested in. Whatever it is, whatever area it, lights up for you will depend on whether you're in a relationship or not. Or it could be relationship matters as well as creative pursuits, right? Because Venus is, of course, creativity. So Venus coming to this halfway point it's like a full moon phase, basically, between Venus and Saturn. So there's a sense of the ability now to see, what's been going on since April in my life relative to Venus and Saturn. That's one part of this story. Let's just go back to Venus in Virgo, and I'll come back to Venus opposite Saturn in a moment. Venus in Virgo is, it depends, of course, which lens you want to look through. If you want to look through ancient texts and more spiritually holistic viewpoints, if you want to look at the constellation Virgo, which is one of the largest constellations, it is massive. And, the Virgo constellation has so much complexities about it, different areas of the the body of this celestial star being maiden woman, who is the picture of Virgo, has so many different facets to her. The head region is, you know, uh, it's the birthing point, right? And it's the seeding and birthing point of the oneness and being connected to source and spirit. It's the most spiritual part of the constellation Virgo. And also in Virgo is the star Spica, which is one of the brightest stars and the most spiritual star, you know. So I'm pointing this out because traditionally Venus in Virgo is in her full position. And, she loses some points, right? From that perspective. And Venus in Virgo is in fall for a particular reason. And there is value in understanding that as well, because um, the difficulty of Venus in Virgo, when it's functioning at a, for lack of a better word, at a more negative level, it will be the experience or projection of extreme criticism, towards oneself and towards others. The non-acceptance, right? The never feeling good enough, or others aren't good enough for you in what they are doing or what they are showing up with, and so forth. It's the best of Virgo is the critical analyst, right? Which what Virgo tends to do, it's such a complex sign. Its opposite sign being Pisces implies that what Virgo needs to integrate is its shadow, which is Pisces. And part of that shadow process of integration is the process of surrendering and trusting and being more compassionate and being more forgiving to oneself and to others as well. And that's a very difficult thing for Virgo, because Virgo has a lot to do with this word we ascribe to Virgo called perfection, right? And it's not that Virgo is perfect, because no sign is perfect. Every sign has its shadow, and every sign archetypally is developing and evolving and forming. Just like the source itself is not perfect, the source too is evolving always. And we are part of that process of the evolution of source. We are just a fragment, if you like. We're a part of that, a piece of that, an expression of that. So the difficulty with Venus in Virgo can be, being pessimistic or negative, or just extremely critical and judgmental. And what Virgo will do is it it creates unconsciously, it creates crises in its life. And it does that deliberately on an unconscious level, because it's actually trying to make things better, just to put it very simply. Virgo is about self-improvement, and any planet in Virgo is trying to improve in those areas or qualities of life. So with Venus in Virgo, it is about assessing our relationships, discerning and having critical reasoning skills as well in processing all of our relationships whilst Venus is in Virgo. So there might be some little crises moments that show up, because crises leads to some type of analysis internally or externally or both. And then what that leads to is greater self-knowledge or greater self-awareness. So without the crisis, there can be no greater self-knowledge or self-awareness that can arise, because we are just stuck in a particular place or zone, and we're only seeing something in maybe a one-dimensional manner. We're not seeing the broader picture, or we're not seeing the details. We're just seeing what we want to see, which of course would be the polarity Pisces, seeing the ideal. So the Venus in Virgo, has that skill to really zoom in and bring about the necessary crisis that we need in order to improve our relationships, our circumstances relative to all Venus things. That could be personal relationships, that can be family relationships, it can be friendships, lovers, any type of relationship. That's some of the archetypal psychology around Venus in Virgo. And because she formed the conjunction to Saturn, earlier this year in April, and she's very soon to come to form the opposition to Saturn, again, it is a real opportunity here to have greater awareness in your relationships, all of them. And with the opposition to Saturn, it could create a complete severing or separation in a particular relationship, or it can build further, from where it's arrived to up to this point. It's very difficult to be a lot more specific than that because every individual and every relationship is very different. But Venus opposite Saturn is a pure pathway and stream of simply greater awareness. And it'll be her standing, in Virgo, opposite Saturn, having sort of like a clearer realization of what she's been doing since April in the world of her relationships. The fact that the constellation Virgo has so much spirituality and purity associated with it, it is also the Virgo constellation in Egypt is also associated with the goddess Isis as well. So Virgo, the constellation Virgo, the maiden, this celestial woman who is associated with Ishtar as well in different ways. She's associated with Isis. Isis and Ishtar are actually Venus anyway, right? So we have these rich, tapestries weaved into the constellation of Virgo, which draw out the more refined, which is a great word for Virgo, the more refined aspects of Venus in Virgo, in her purity, her beauty, her motherly energy of the all-loving mother. One of the differences between the constellation Virgo and Venus being in Virgo versus Venus being in Leo, for instance. Venus in Leo is a really powerful position and it's a secondary exaltation in Babylonian astrology. So Venus in Leo is in her glory. She's as bright as the sun, so she has this glorious power, glorious power and shine to the light that emanates from the pulsing heart of Venus. And it's so big and so bright, it can it can push people away, but it can also really light the flame in people's hearts. It just depends how that energy is being embodied and also expressed, in people's lives. The point is that in Virgo, there's a real different story going on here. Virgo and Leo are adjacent to each other, right? And those two signs are probably the most two different signs in the whole wheel than most. There are other combinations that are really strange relative to the differences between them. With Leo, it's like being the king and, having rulership, right? And power, um, like tremendous power. And in Virgo, there's none of that exists. In Virgo, it's about humility. You know, it's about recognizing that actually, I'm not as great as I thought. I did a video on YouTube the other day, not on YouTube, on Facebook, and it was just something fun. I just do some funny little videos every now and then, and I think I said something like, "Everyone is a legend in their own world," and if you understand what I mean by that, you'll understand how true it is actually. So that's kind of, Venus in Leo, or the Leo energy, is like, I'm a legend, it carries that kind of vibration, right? And in some cases, it's validated, right, from the point of view of um, the power perhaps that person has in the various ways that might be. But in Virgo, what happens in the zodiac is that in Leo, the person is fully formed. The individual has fully self-actualized. They've gotten to the point where their ego is fully formed. The ego and the personality is fully formed, and it's just there to radiate its light and show its brilliance. And that has its place. That's why Leo exists in the will. But when we get to Virgo, what it does is it spins that around, right? And it just throws it on its head and says, well, now you've got to take a step back and maybe take a look at what else could you work on? Because are you really that, are you really that fantastic? Are you really that legend that you think you are, so to speak, right? So Virgo has, it has humility, it has a shyness about it. It's modest, it's a lot more quiet, and it's deeply complex and unconsciously quite often wrapped up in tremendous guilt. And it's always looking for ways to atone the guilt that it actually holds for various reasons. And psychologically, what can happen with the archetype of Virgo as well is that because it can struggle to embrace its polarity, Pisces, which is to surrender and let go. And what Virgo will do is it will try to control everything. It has to have a great sense of control of whatever's going on. And the letting go, which is Pisces, and the surrendering, which is Pisces, is extremely difficult for Virgo. And so the way to avoid that and to block that shadow of Pisces out, the way they do it is they just find a million things to do throughout the day. There's no stopping. I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to do this list, I've got to tick that off, I've got to, it's just nonstop. So there's like this, they are terrified of this sense of an existential void of, it's like when Virgo is not busy, when they're not doing something, they feel like they are not useful. They're useless. It's a waste of time just sitting here doing nothing. I've got to be doing something. That stems from something much deeper than just having a belief that by sitting around and relaxing, I'm wasting time, so to speak, right? So there are a lot of deep complexities involved in the archetype of Virgo, but primarily it is seeking to address its imperfections, and it does that by attracting crises in its life, because that leads to, as I said, analysis, and then that leads to some type of knowledge, further knowledge and understanding. But the the evolutionary process and journey every time Venus goes into Virgo for us is it is about clearing out, cleaning up, being, realistic, about everything to do with Venus in our life, relationships and so forth. But we also have to bring in the polarity Pisces, which is about compassion and forgiveness. It's about letting go, and it's about, you know, recognizing that, people are going to have flaws. No one's perfect, and neither are you, nor am I, right? And that's one of the greatest lessons here, if you like, with Venus in Virgo. It's very much like what I said about the Virgo solar eclipse. We have to unite discernment and compassion and marry them together so that we have the ability to see things clearly, but not lose sight of humility and compassion and forgiveness for the mistakes that people make, for the flawed aspects of every single person. All this is part of Venus in Virgo. And at a much, much higher level, Venus in Virgo, from the point of view of the constellation, as I said, she corresponds to these extraordinary divinities which are connected to magic and ritual and healing, fertility, procreation, the harvest. She's the goddess of the harvest. She plants all these seeds. She's a goddess of agriculture and fertility. That whole constellation, points to all those components. And this is happening, of course, during the spring equinox here for us in the southern hemisphere, and autumn equinox for you guys in the northern hemisphere. So there's a seasonal shift going on, and Venus in Virgo is part of this story of this transition as well. She's part of the Virgo solar eclipse, which, is just hours away. And as I said, there is a 6-month window for solar eclipses, especially. So even though the eclipse happens, in a few hours' time, whilst that this particular day or tomorrow might be quite important for certain people, for a lot of other people, there might not be much that shows up. But what will happen is, because Venus is in Virgo while this solar eclipse is happening in Virgo, she's carrying part of this energy as well. And so she's going to help us work through some of these issues that may be presenting at the moment with this Virgo solar eclipse, which of course includes the Pisces total lunar eclipse that we just had 2 weeks ago. And this whole story is very much about Pisces Virgo, which is, trust, surrender, Pisces, and reality, analysis and discernment, Virgo. And again, at the higher levels, it is about tapping into the divine feminine, divine mother, the spiritual, deeply spiritual aspects of Virgo, which involve different practices and rituals. And that looks very different for every single person. But, like when Venus was in Leo just the last 4 weeks or so, we might have just been having a great time, having a party, one big long party, having a lot of fun, a lot of socializing, a lot of playing, and, all the Venus in Leo things. And now it's like we've got to clean up after the party, so to speak. It's, when Venus goes into Virgo, she sort of looks at, if you can just imagine your house and you've been partying for a month and you haven't done any work around it, there'd be a lot of cleaning up to do now, wouldn't there? So just think of that metaphor as a metaphor to connect with just your life situation and life story around anything to do with Venus at the moment. So she's Yeah, she's got a fair bit of work to do in Virgo. And also because she is the morning star, which is goddess Pallas Athena, um, and Pallas Athena is a very the most strategic goddess out of all of them. She's so skilled. She's got so much wisdom, and those attributes, they too correspond to Virgo in a lot of ways because Virgo can be very, very strategic as well. Virgo, it doesn't miss a thing relative to detail, um, which is very important in a lot of different situations. So she's gifting us this time at the moment, excuse me, to process to process and analyze um, our Venusian aspects of life from a place of humbleness and humility versus arrogance and being a legend in one's world, so to speak. It's it's just a cleanup time, more or less. But although that's again, that's a very important part of this story. Like I was saying with the Virgo solar eclipse, it's the little things, the small things that we tend to that for a lot of different reasons end up being much more significant, and a lot more powerful than we might think in terms of our evolution and growth. Because think about it, right? You just, no one evolves overnight or even in one lifetime. So, Virgo, that's what Virgo points us to. It points us to all the different little steps that we need to take, all the different methods that we might need to try and explore and experience, the different ways of understanding and analyzing and processing through things, versus just shutting down and, you know, going into Pisces mode from the point of view of escape, which might be just, getting blotto every night and just being wasted every night. That way you don't have to really address the underlying cause of what you're trying to numb out. You can just stay in that um, illusion. But what Venus in Virgo also reminds us of, quite apart from the fact that she's trying to improve, help us improve in our life, and her shadow Pisces, asks us to be able to let go and surrender, especially to things that are out of our control. And most things are out of our control. But what's lacking sometimes in with Venus in Virgo is if she doesn't have a belief, a deep belief system, if you like. Some perhaps a better way to say it would be to say a deep soul connection to source. That's what she needs, which is what Pisces brings in, at the best level. When she can integrate that deeper connection to source, she can be a lot more satisfied with this journey of self-improvement, and she then becomes the goddess who she can be so helpful and so kind and assisting towards others in a non-judgmental and non-critical way because she has overcome, let's say, her own inner fear of an existential void by integrating something much deeper that is infinite, that has no timeline, that has no frame, as it were. Pisces has no timeline, it has no frame, it has no boundaries, it has no limits. It's infinite, right? And when she can tune into that energy, she brings it into her Virgoan field of how she's organizing um, and planning and dissecting and analyzing and working on things, right? To improve herself. And let's not forget this could be about health as well, nutrition and health, which, when we're much younger, we all of us take it for granted because, we feel invincible. But as we get a bit older, the body changes, the chemistry in the body, changes, the biology changes, all sorts of things happen. And, we're not as resilient when we're 40 as we were when we were 20. So a Venus in Virgo transit might also be just an opportunity to work on those sorts of aspects of life. I had a guy trying to help me the other day change a brake light in my car, and I'm not sure what his age was, but I don't think he would have been much older than late 40s, let's say, right? And he was so overweight that I'm surprised he's still alive, to be quite honest. He couldn't, when he took one step, he was breathing like he was gasping for his last breath of life. It was that intense. And, he's got this walking stick and he couldn't stand on his feet. And I'm thinking, how the fuck is this guy going to change my brake light? Like, I really appreciate that he offered, but like it's like he was having a panic attack while he was just sitting there because he was sitting at the end of my car because he couldn't stand. So I'd pulled up the hood and he's sitting on the edge of the car and, breathing like it was his last breath of life. And I'm looking at this guy and I'm thinking, like, I just felt sorry for him more than anything else. I mean, yes, of course, I had the thoughts of, well, how did this guy get into this situation? Like, how can you let yourself get to that level? But I don't know. There are different reasons and complexities why things happen to people's bodies. But yeah, I mean, I've just been researching a lot of different things on health lately, particularly on cholesterol, because cholesterol has been demonized by the mainstream medical industry. And it's led to, brainwashing people into believing that cholesterol is evil and it leads to heart disease and it kills you. But with all the different research and things that I've been reading and listening to, lots of different practitioners and doctors from all around the world, we've been greatly misled about the matter of cholesterol. There are two different types of cholesterol, and one of them is said to be the so-called harmful one. But from my understanding with the research thus far, it's got to do with the inflammation inside your body that if that, so I think it's the LDL that's considered to be the bad guy, as it were, which it's not a bad guy, but that's how they've framed it. If you've got really high inflammation in your body, for whatever reason that may be, that's when the LDL can be problematic for you. But it's not the cholesterol itself that's the problem. It's the inflammation and the subsequent, calcification that occurs inside the arteries and things like that, which can, ultimately lead to heart problems and the like. So anyway, I have sidetracked a bit, but we're talking about Virgo, which is about health. And so I've just, this whole, since the Virgo new moon, particularly, I haven't stopped, researching and looking at different things because I actually do have high cholesterol as per the mainstream medical model recommendation, and they've been trying to push me into taking statin drugs, which of course I've just said, you can stick that where the sun don't shine, more or less. And I'm, working that process out myself in different ways. But, it's we've just been misled, in so many ways. And if we don't initiate our own journey of asking questions, right, and digging deeper, we just fall prey to systems that have very specific agendas and objectives. Some people, could be caught up in that whole system in an unconscious way, not knowing that they too are caught up, like certain doctors and things like that, could just be so blindsided and so wrapped up in the belief, just sticking to the matter of cholesterol for a moment, that what was stated many, many years ago, a few decades ago, that they believe that that is a truth. And so they've been brainwashed, to pump out statin drugs like it's candy. And there's quite a bit of research that's been done on statin drugs, and there's various research papers, and a few of them say a few different things, all along the same lines. Just some point to other things, whereas other research papers point to other things. But there's very little evidence that the statin drugs can help in any way, shape, or form from the point of view of if somebody is, leading towards heart disease. In fact, what the statin drugs do is according to what I've researched and heard people say, the statin drugs are likely to get you to heart disease a lot faster because they block something called, I think it's called Q10. And so what they do is they block the pathway of the cholesterol through the arteries, and they block the good cholesterol and the other cholesterol that's been named the bad guy, which is not the bad guy. Pretty much those statins block the pathway of cholesterol, flowing through the body. And the fact is that, your brain is made up of cholesterol. And so since statin drugs came to the world stage, what has been evident as well is that, well, they came on the market back in the 1980s, from what I understand. And if anybody out there listening to this knows more about this, or I've said something incorrect, please feel free to comment and share your insights. I'm very open to this subject, and I'm not saying I know everything about it, but I have been doing quite a bit of research of late. Anyway, since the 1980s, before the 1980s, there was nothing like dementia that actually existed, Alzheimer's dementia. So it's since the statin drugs came to the world stage that dementia started to become this illness that pretty much kills people. And in Australia, dementia is the leading cause of death, second to heart disease. Now, cholesterol actually makes hormones as well, by the way. All the different hormones in your body, estrogen, progesterone, etc. So If we're going to block something that is naturally made in our body, that actually helps our brain operate and keeps our hormones at the levels that we need them to be and keeps them active and alive and in check. If we're going to block something that creates all that, is wouldn't you be questioning why the fuck would we be doing that? Why would we be blocking something that's so vital in our human biology and health and well-being? So anyway, as you can tell from everything I've just said, this has been on my mind a lot because I have been told I've got high cholesterol, and I'm not dead. I'm going to die one day. We all are, but I don't think I'm going to die from high cholesterol. So how's this relevant to Venus in Virgo? Extremely fucking relevant, because anything in Virgo, this is what it has the power to do. It has the power to evoke in us a process of analysis and asking questions and figuring things out versus just accepting a mainstream perspective or narrative and just bowing down to that like it's God. Because that's what's happened in the medical field. The gods have become doctors, so to speak, or the doctors think that they're gods, and people treat them in such a way. They give all their power over to these people called doctors, whom, by the way, when they became certified as doctors, they signed something which said do no harm. And by the way, Australia has the highest rate of deaths of people in hospitals. More people die in Australia than anywhere else in the world. If you go to a hospital, you're fucked. If you end up in a hospital, you're more or less fucked. And I know that sounds harsh and negative, and I will say this, sometimes obviously it's absolutely necessary, but a lot of the times it's not, and that's my point. Because once you go in and you let them open you up, they open you up and then they say, oh, now you've got to take this because we opened this up. And then you take that thing that they give you and then, oh, but now you've got to take this to look after the symptoms that are happening from this particular medication over here. Oh, and now you've got, and it becomes this, it ends your life. That's what happens. I've seen it happen to people in my own life. Yeah. So Venus in Virgo, new moon in Virgo, solar eclipse in Virgo, empower yourself to fucking find things out, to investigate and to not be scared to ask doctors questions. You'll find most of them, GPs especially, know very little. And if you challenge them, they don't fucking like it. But you don't need to sit there having a debate. You just need to use them for what you need them for, which is, okay, you might want to go and get a blood test, or you may need, X, Y, Z, right? So you go and have a consultation with them and you tell them what you need, What happens is people go in there completely disempowered with no knowledge, having done no research, no asking questions, no looking things up themselves, and they put all their hope in this one doctor. And what does the doctor do? Generally, all they do is just give you a script of something which has tremendous side effects and basically just, helps you deal with some of the symptoms temporarily before things get even worse. And then you go back and they give you another script, which is even worse, and so on and so forth. That's pretty much what most people do when they go and visit the doctor. That's why when the COVID hit the world stage, just about every motherfucker ran out there and got an injection. And if I'm wrong in what I'm saying, well, then I must be fucking delusional, because we all know that most people accepted that as a truth. Do you guys remember the fear they put in everyone? If you don't have this injection, you're going to die. You're going to kill other people. I mean, frankly, I always knew that was the most absurd, insane, ridiculous, fucking dumbass narrative story that they pulled out of their asses. And I just was in, disbelief how everyone fucking ran. And they did. And what was the result? So I love Virgo from that perspective. I have a brother who's Virgo, and you know he's such an extraordinary, intelligent, wise guy. And I see the best of Virgo come through him, and then I see his shadow Pisces come through, which is hilarious. But the point being that if it's one sign apart from Scorpio, which is going to, get to the bottom of shit, it's Virgo. And so in all its judgmental, critical, negative bullshit that can come out, which it does as well, it has these other extraordinary abilities. So Venus in Virgo, it is about the relationship components of our life, but it is also about empowering ourselves with knowledge, understanding, by analyzing things, Virgo, by exploring, investigating, asking questions, comparing different researchers and so forth. So why would we do that? So that we can fucking empower ourselves. And that's what Venus in Virgo can help us do as well, by the way. That part I've just added in. Perhaps a lot of people tuned out. Doesn't really matter. I felt it was important to voice. It's certainly important for me. And hopefully some of you listening to this appreciate it as well. Because let's face it, right? If we don't take care of our health, if we don't if you don't have health, what do you have? You could have, you know, fucking like gazillion dollars in the bank. If you've got no health, what the fuck are you going to do with your gazillion dollars? You're going to sit there just flicking the dollar bills in your bed with no arms and no legs, or I don't know, whatever the fuck it might be that's going on. That's why health is wealth, period. And we've just given so much of our power over to the wrong sources. So every time Virgo season pops up, in this case, we've got, we had a Virgo new moon, we've got a Virgo solar eclipse. Bernadette Brady talks about health and letters and news, receiving news around things during this solar eclipse. Venus is in Virgo. She's the morning star, which is a goddess of wisdom, strategy. We've just got to take it upon ourselves to figure things out, to work on things, to improve. That's what Virgo is about in a nutshell. But at the same time, like I said, if the Virgo neurotic element kicks in and we don't get some Pisces coming through, we can just become neurotic and obsessed, and it becomes like the workaholic, who forgets to sleep, forgets to eat, and who's just non-stop at something, and that's not healthy either, obviously. So there has to be a balance. But much deeper than that is the shadow side of Pisces, which is about trusting into the abyss, into what you can't see, what you can't control. Because if you believe in the divine source creation, right, and you trust in that, and somebody says to you, well, prove to me that there is a God. Prove to me that you are, prove to me the connection that you have to God. How the fuck are you going to do that? It's not a material thing. It's not a physical thing. It's something that is private and personal that you are either tuned into and with or not. And it requires no proof. If it's there, it's there. And when you know it's there, you know. And this is part of Venus's journey in Virgo. She has to remember that it's not about just totally controlling everything, but it is also about surrendering to the things that we can't control and perhaps the things that we can't see in her process throughout the sign of Virgo. And I'll just leave it with Venus forms a sextile to Jupiter, which is one of the most favorable aspects, either to have natally or to have via transit. Venus, Jupiter, sextile. Now, Venus is not in her strongest sign, just to point that out again. Doesn't matter. There's a lot of benefit that can come out of Venus in Virgo, especially if you apply the skill, the wisdom, the analysis, the honesty, the humility, and the integration of surrendering and trusting as well. And I'm not talking about surrendering and trusting, some GP that you go and visit in a clinic. You really have to be very smart and bring in the Virgo into that environment. When you let go and surrender, I'm talking about in your heart, in your soul, with something that's ineffable. There are no words to describe it. Virgo has its place in the medical clinic when you go and visit your doctor. It's the perfect place for it. No pun intended. Now, the sextile with Venus and Jupiter happens on the 8th of October. And obviously that's just there for, a couple of days, the range. But it is a very fortuitous window because it is the two benefics, Venus and Jupiter. Jupiter is still in Cancer and will be, which is its exalted position. And I guess if whatever's going on, in your life right now or closer to that time, that is a date worthy of planning certain things that where you might need a bit of luck on your side on something, where you might need a fortunate sort of hand to dip in, or a fortunate hand to come out of the sky, so to speak, to give you that stroke of luck in something that you are in at the moment. That is, a perfect window. That's one side of it. The other side of it, of course, could be just really, really just enjoying and appreciating and feeling the happiness and joy of anything in your life. Because Jupiter is joy, Venus is happiness. And so it could you might have a special event, just to bring it down to mundane, simple things. You might have a particular event around that time. It's just going to be such a beautiful energy to really feel joy and happiness, And who doesn't want more joy and more happiness with all the, all the stresses and cataclysmic, events going on the earth? that affect everybody in different ways, some people more than others. So if we can have, a little window in the sky that says, hey, just take this opportunity to just really enjoy and appreciate and be really, really happy in whatever's going on in your life, just to tune into that and to appreciate it. And as I said, if you need a bit of a stroke of luck, that would be a great window for that. And also, when Venus finishes her journey in Virgo and then ends up going into Libra, and this is where I will leave it. Think about it like this. While she's moving through Virgo, she can help us work on a lot of different things from the different levels that I've kind of indicated from for the purposes of self-empowerment and self-improvement, like deep self-improvement and self-empowerment that's not about ego power, like an ego fucking maniac, self-improvement and self-empowerment so that we can be empowered within our own well-being on every single level. That's what I mean by self-empowerment in that way. And the purification of Virgo, so there can be, some purging that goes on here as well. That could be change of nutrition and the like. And then finally, when she goes into Libra, which I will come back to speak to that, but I just want you to keep this in mind. When she goes into Libra, when she reaches about 23, 24 degrees of Libra, she hits the star spiker. And that is a portal of pure, divine, spiritual magic. So think about this Virgoan journey with Venus in Virgo, helping us clear and clean what we need to, empower ourselves in the way that we need to with knowledge and understanding and self-purification on whatever level or for whatever reason that may be. The sextile between Venus and Jupiter, portal of stroke of luck, opportunity, happiness and joy, appreciation, leading us towards Venus in Libra, her home sign, and ultimately hitting the star spiker. I'll come back to speak to that and I'll leave it there for now. I hope you enjoyed this transmission. I hope it was useful. Leave your comments and questions below and reach out if you'd like to connect with me. Okay, much love, much Venus love. Bye for now.